Oh no! No, no!
Yo, how you doing? Today I'm gonna do a video that I actually really want to do. This is different than what I usually am used to doing. Usually when I do a how I would book video, it would be me booking something that either hasn't come out yet, or it'd be me rebooking something that I thought was done poorly or bad as something I didn't like, and then essentially rebooking it to the way that I want to rebook it. But today, instead, what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be rebooking a show that I actually like. In fact, this show is actually my favorite show of all time, The Spectacular Spider-Man. Now, I know a lot of people might have their own opinions on what their favorite show of all time is, but for me, Spectacular Spider-Man is my favorite show of all time for various reasons, mainly because, one, I'm not a big show guy. Even though I'm writing my own show, one of my biggest issues when it comes to shows is the lack of either consistency or the lack of staying on task with what the story is supposed to be. Most times in shows, what they do is that they'll book a first season and then they'll move on to the next, and then somewhere along the way they just don't really understand what makes the show what it is, or don't know where the show should be going. And usually that harms the show, because for me, I like when a show knows exactly what it's doing, knows where it's going, and is able to build itself into that, because then it feels like it's actually building up to something. It's like when you watch a movie, right? You know that they had to book the ending to the movie, so that you know it's going to be a coherent story. But when it comes to shows, they don't have that. Most times people don't book an ending to their show. And so likewise, it makes the show not that enjoyable or likable for me, because they don't really know what direction they're going in. And even if they do know what direction they're going in, they haven't really fully mapped out everything. So that's why I'm not a big show person. But let me stop. But with Spectacular Spider-Man, it's a different story, because they actually did know what they were doing. They knew exactly what they were doing with the show, and they mapped everything out, and all the ideas that they had that they were going to explore, and how they were going to consistently do that. And so that's one of the big things that I love about Spectacular Spider-Man. That's what it makes it my favorite show of all time. Not only because is it the best and the definitive version of Spider-Man, but it also is just the most coherent show with a plan that I've seen. And so I enjoy it for that factor, and that is why it's my favorite show. However, even though I think the first season is absolute perfection in writing, everything is booked beautifully, perfectly. I wouldn't change much or anything about it, except for maybe just certain Eddie Brock scenes in episode 11 and 12. Maybe I would have switched Eddie Brock going on a date with Mary Jane in 12 and then getting fired in 11, so it makes him feel more vengeful in 12, and then maybe go to the church, do the whole religion angle in 12. Other than that, I think everything else is perfect about season 1. However, I can't say the same thing about season 2, and it's not to say that season 2 is bad. It's not bad, it's great. I love season 2 as well. It's just that season 2 doesn't feel as strong or concrete, or at least for me, certain story beats feel like they were told in the wrong order. And when they were told in the wrong order, it made it feel like that the show was not able to fully capitalize on a lot of the things that they were building up for the season, or a lot of the moments that should have been felt during the season. What I'm going to be doing today is I'm going to be rebooking season 2 of the show. Now, to specify how I'm going to do this, I am going to go episode by episode, rebooking every scene in the episode, rebooking the whole season. So there's 13 episodes in the season. Now, something I do have to also explain to people, just so they get a better understanding about how I book this, is the arcs. So Spectacular Spider-Man is one of those shows which knows what it's doing, and so it has arcs in its story. And essentially what arc is, it's like a 3 to 4 episode storyline that focuses primarily on a specific thing for 3 to 4 episodes. It's like an arc is a different movie in a franchise, essentially. One arc is one movie, the second arc is the sequel, and then third arc is like the third movie, and so on and so forth. That's what an arc is for shows, but instead of it being, one episode, it's usually 3 or 4 episodes. In this case, Spectacular Spider-Man has 13 episodes, so it's split into 4 arcs, and it's 3 to 4 episodes per arc. So you have 3 arcs with 3 episodes, and then 1 arc with 4 episodes. And for the Spectacular Spider-Man, each arc also has a name so that you remember what, and it's about something, you know, it's about something specific. So in season 1, you had 4 arcs. You had arc 1, which was biology, or the lizard arc. That was episodes 1, 2, and 3. You had arc 2, which was economics, or the big man arc, which was episodes 4, 5, and 6. Arc 3, you had chemistry, which was the Green Goblin arc from episode 7, 8, and 9. And then finally in season 1, you had arc 4, which was psychology, which was the symbiote arc, which was episodes 10, 11, 12, and 13. And then likewise, in season 2, you have arc 1, which was engineering, or the master planner arc, which was episodes 1, 2, 3, and 4. You have arc 2, which was human development, or the Return of Venom arc, which was episodes 5, 6, and 7. You have arc 3, which I believe is criminology, which was episodes 8, 9, and 10, or the Gangland arc, the Gang War arc. And then last but not least, you have arc 4, which was drama, or the Return of Green Goblin arc, which was episodes 11, 12, and 13. So it's important for you to know this, so that way when I start describing it and explaining it, it makes more sense, because I do switch certain arcs around and I do switch certain episodes around. And so knowing each arc and knowing how I book it is important for you to understand how I book the season. So whilst season 2 starts with engineering and then goes on to human development, into criminology, and then into drama, in my booking would actually switch engineering and human development. And I would make arc 1 human development, or the Return of Venom arc, and I would make arc 2 engineering, or the master planner arc. And likewise, I would also make each of those 3 episodes each, and then make the criminology arc, the gang war arc, 4 episodes. Now, for me to explain what happens in each episode and what exactly I switch, I'm going to explain the episodes based off of what villain, or what essentially Spider-Man's main goal in each episode was. So in the actual season 2, in arc 1, you had the engineering arc, master planner arc, which you had episode 1, he fought Mysterio, episode 2, Craven, 3, Sinister Six, and then 4 was the Master Planner episode. And then arc 2 was Human Development, the Venom arc, which he fought Sandman in 5, Colonel Jupiter in 6, Venom in 7. Then arc 3, it was the Criminology arc, the Gang War arc, which was the Accomplices, the Enforcers, and then the Gang War. And then finally in arc 4, you have the Drama arc with the Goblin, which was episode 11, Molten Man, episode 12, The Vault, and episode 13, which I believe is the Goblin episode, yeah, obviously. So how I would book it as the human development arc first. So arc 1, episodes 1, Craven, episode 2, Colonel Jupiter, episode 3, Venom. Then in arc 2, it would be 3 episodes as well. Engineering, I would make it engineering. Episode 4, Mysterio, 5, Sinister Six, 6, the Master Planner. And then arc 3, I would have be 4 episodes for criminology. Episode 7 would be Sandman. Episode 8, the Accomplices. Episode 9, the Enforcers. And episode 10 would be the Gang War. And then I would keep the Goblin arc, arc 4 drama, the same, Molten Man, Vault, Goblin. Now, this is where storyteller Eric Moreno here has to go into some detail about how this would work, because even though on the surface it's easy for me to just say, oh, these are the villains that Spider-Man faces in each of these episodes, or how I would have booked it, there's more layers to it, because not only do I have to think about Spider-Man and the building of Spider-Man's story, but I also have to think about Peter Parker. And when I change the Spider-Man villains for each episode, I'm also subsequently affecting the Peter Parker stuff, because the Peter Parker stuff is just as tied and connected to the Spider-Man stuff. In season 1, this was especially prevalent. A lot of the villains that Peter Parker faced in season 1 had a motif or a theme behind it that would come back into the life of Peter Parker by the end of facing that villain. And so in season 2, I have to think about that when I am rebooking the story. And so when I describe these episodes, I have to be in more detail about what actually happens in the episodes, so that way you know that the plotting of each episode should flow more naturally than just saying like, oh, I wish Spider-Man fought this villain in this episode. No, there's more layers to it. There's more details. And this is the part where I actually have to go scene by scene and explain why I would book the story in this format as compared to its original format of season 2. Now, something to note is that even though I am retaining a lot, or pretty much 98% of what actually happened in season 2, there are going to be some slight differences that I personally make for how I would have booked Spectacular Spider-Man to make the story flow more naturally and to make it more better. So that includes adding new scenes that were not there before, or slightly changing something so that it makes more sense for my version of season 2. And then of course playing into what would inevitably have been season 3, or at least conceptually wise, which I might do a season 3 booking episode if I need to study upon it a little bit more. I need to figure out more of the villains. I got to think more about the arcs that would have happened in season 3, and then once I do that, I'll go into detail of how I would have booked my version of season 3 of Spectacular Spider-Man. Now, beyond that point, I'm not going to do. I'm only going to do season 3 because beyond that point, it's just fan theory or just whatever concept I've come up with. So I also want to mention here that this is another rare time where I am using notes, because for me to remember every scene by scene would be impossible. Like, even though I have a great memory, I'm not going to remember all these details, and all these details are very important to make the story of how I would rebook season 2 very important. So when I look over here from time to time, I'm simply just looking at the notes that I have for the scenes of each episode. And also, I'm also going to be changing certain names of the episodes, not to something new or different, but they are going to be the same names. It's just certain episode names are going to be swapped around for specific reasons that will make more sense when we get there. So starting off with episode 1 is what I would title as First Steps. So this is the episode I would title First Steps. And of course, I would start episode 1 the exact same way that season 2 actually starts, with Peter Parker having the nightmare about Venom after thinking about how he didn't make a move when Gwen kissed him, and then he has the nightmare with Venom and then wakes up in the morning. To me, I always felt it was weird for Peter to have this nightmare at the beginning of season 2, episode 1, and then it just kind of fades away for the rest of the episode, never becomes more relevant or homes in on the point. And so in this episode, I would have this episode be the episode where Peter is haunted by Eddie Brock or Venom, and he keeps seeing Eddie Brock or Venom, or at least he thinks he is, and he's not sure if he is. So after the credits roll, Peter Parker, he checks on Eddie Brock's dorm, but he doesn't find him there. Eddie Brock is gone, and so he questions to himself where he could be. Then I would immediately move on to Kraven's introduction. So Kraven would be introduced, the whole thing with the rhino and all that would be exactly the same. The only difference I would have is that instead of the master planner being the one to tell Kraven about Spider-Man, it would be kind of more of a worldwide phenomenon that Spider-Man has become because he's this hero in New York. And so it reaches Kraven on his own, rather than have it be like, oh, Master Planner called him up. There's a very specific reason as to why I'm doing that, which will make more sense later. So then it goes into some certain episode 1 plot points, like Peter Parker kind of writing down his list of things to do, doing the whole pancake scene with Aunt May, and then of course, you know, going to the school, having his little flirtations with Gwen. But instead of Liz Allen coming in to take him for the midterms, it would be Liz Allen coming in to ask him if he's going to go to Flash's game that night, if he's going to go watch the game with Flash. And ultimately Peter Parker does indeed agree to go with Liz. And then from there, I would immediately cut into Norman Osborn with the Connors and then the teacher and Miles Warren. to introduce Miles Warren, because I would make him a lot more prevalent in just this arc alone. And then have the Connors reinstate Peter, and of course Norman Osborn wanting to be his mentor and getting the idea from Peter being reinstated with the Connors. So then Peter is at the game, at Flash's game, with the big football game where they're doing the football. And whilst he's at the game, he thinks he sees Eddie Brock off to the side in the stands. And so what he ends up doing is that he ends up leaving the game to go see and figure out if he did in fact see Eddie Brock. And so obviously he gets into Spider-Man gear, see if he finds Eddie Brock, because he's following him. And then this is where I would have Kraven come in and hunt him down and stalk him essentially, and then they would have their big first fight, Kraven versus Spider-Man. They'd go toe-to-toe, head-to-head, facing each other. Meanwhile, while this is happening, back at the game, Gwen talks to Mary Jane about the fact that she kissed Peter. Instead of being at a lunch table, it would be here at the game, at the bleachers. Tell her about, I kissed Peter, that's great and all, and, figuring out what to do from there. And then at the same time that happens, Flash gets injured. So this is where I would have Flash get injured in the game. Liz is, of course, distressed about this, and everyone is like, yo, is Flash all right? Is Flash good? And meanwhile, Spider-Man is facing against Kraven. He ultimately beats Kraven, leaves him knocked out, and Kraven is, well, not knocked out, he was hanging, he leaves him hanging, and Kraven feels dishonored by the fact that he lost to Spider-Man. Now, this is where I would have certain elements be a little bit different. Now, Peter returns back to the game, and he finds out that Flash is injured, and everyone's like, yo, where'd you go? Flash got injured. They tell him about it, and Peter's like, oh, shit. I thought I saw Eddie, went after him, but I couldn't find him. And so that whole ordeal happens. And then with Kraven, this is where I would make some differences, a little differences, but it makes more sense as to why I'm doing these differences. So with Kraven, instead of having Kraven go searching around New York with his lion to find Spider-Man and then running into Miles Warren, I would instead have Calypso be the one to give him some enhanced drugs. So yes, I would make the change that Kraven does not become the feline apex predator in this one, not because I'm not going to pursue it. Don't get me wrong. A lot of people do hate it. I'm one who does not personally hate it. I don't hate the Kraven transformation. What bothers me is that it came too quickly. It felt a little too forced, way too quick. And so instead of having Kraven become the Catman in this episode, I would instead have him be drugged up and enhanced like he usually does in the comics. He gets drugged up, enhanced, and he becomes stronger, and now he's ready to hunt Spider-Man once again. And the reason as to why is because I would personally, when it comes to the feline side of things with Miles Warren testing him, I would have personally saved that for season 3. Now, if I make my season 3 booking, it would make a lot more sense as to why. So in the morning, Peter Parker, he's reviewing his checklist. He's like, man, I messed up all my checklists. But the one thing that he did do right is that he got a letter from the Bugle about his exclusive contract that he's gonna do. At the same time, he also gets the call from Norman Osborn about wanting to be his mentor. I like to be your mentor. And whilst that call is happening, Liz also calls Peter, which ultimately affects his plans to go have breakfast with Norman, because he has to go to Liz's side, Liz's aid, to essentially, be there for Flash as he goes through surgery. And so Peter obviously starts making his way over as Spider-Man, because that's the quickest way for him to travel. And whilst he's doing that, he thinks he sees Venom also swinging by in the buildings. He thinks he sees Venom swinging, and so he decides to go follow him. And as he does, he instead runs into a much more superpowered Kraven, who brings on a much tougher fight for Peter, and they go toe-to-toe in the winter, facing against each other. And pretty much it wouldn't exactly be the same fight as when he becomes the feline, but it would be a more formidable fight for Peter as he struggles to face this superpowered version of Kraven. But ultimately, of course, he wins in the end. And then when it comes to Kraven, the drums start playing, and he disappears, not to be seen for the rest of the episode, as he goes, meets up with Liz, and ultimately they find out that Flash is doing all right, but it's going to be a long recovery process. So Peter then, because he's paranoid about Eddie Brock, and because he has the fear of Eddie Brock showing up at any time, of Venom still being around, kind of playing on the paranoia from the prior season of where Eddie Brock is, he goes to investigate the symbiote. And as he does, Eddie Brock obviously finds it and breaks it and frees the symbiote to reunite with it. And that's how I would close the first episode. And I think, for me personally, that's a better opening episode for season 2, because not only does it play on the fear of Eddie Brock and Venom immediately following the symbiote arc, which I feel like makes a lot more sense than holding off on it for 4 whole episodes and then just kind of coming back to it. But also it plays on the predator-prey angle with Kraven, kind of playing into, because Peter Parker is so afraid of Venom and is so paranoid about Venom, he becomes weaker prey for Kraven to try and hunt. And so I have those themes kind of playing into each other, whilst Eddie Brock slowly is, manipulating him and psychologically by making him believe that he is Venom, or Venom is back. So starting off episode 2, which I would call Growing Pains, this would be the Colonel Jupiter episode. Venom is back in black and on a crime spree. And, the whole opening scene with the Growing Pains episode is the exact same, except the only difference is that it's now episode 2 instead of episode 6. So after the credits roll, Peter would come back to the lab and he would thank the Connors for reinstating him, and that he's going to do much better this time around, as he's introduced to Deborah Whitman and he's introduced to Miles Warren, who is very intrigued and interested about Dr. Connors' personal research about mammalian DNA, or at least lizard DNA, as everybody kind of wants to know where Eddie Brock is, which Peter also wants to know that too, kind of playing into his paranoia still. And during this, while they're all talking with each other about this stuff, J. Jonah Jameson comes in with his son John Jameson, who is constantly growing and being affected by the spores from the symbiote from when he touched it on the space shuttle. Now, for me, I feel like this also being a lot earlier on in the season is very crucial, because he touched the symbiote at the beginning of the symbiote, or actually at the end of the Goblin arc from season 1. And so for me, this is another case where I feel like they held off on this storyline for a little bit longer than they should have. This should have been pretty much an immediate story, because if you got infected in the early parts of November, like November 1st, and then in the actual season, he doesn't transform and get bigger and stronger until January, mid-January at that, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So for me, making this during Christmas, this is the Christmas episode in my vision. This would be the Christmas episode. So making it in Christmas is a lot sooner of a time gap and would make more sense for his infection to take a hold than for 2 whole months and a half, maybe even 3 months, which I didn't think made a whole lot of sense. So obviously with the whole Growing Pains angle, they are playing into, they were trying to trick the audience, for those who do know that, John Jameson, he's becoming the werewolf, he's becoming the man-wolf. But in reality, he's just becoming bigger and stronger, and he gets the Colonel Jupiter suit from Dr. Connors. And then of course this would lead into their taxi drive to the Bugle, with Jameson inspiring John to be a hero and to take down Spider-Man because he's back in black and on a crime spree. And then Peter, after that, is swinging through New York. He's like, man, I can't believe somebody's trying to frame him again. The whole truck scene happens. Truck crashes over. He thinks it's Spider-Man. Venom fight. Pretty much a lot of this is same story beats. So it goes through with Venom fighting Spider-Man, Colonel Jupiter showing up for the fire, Colonel Jupiter and Spider-Man saving people from the fire, and then ultimately Spider-Man fleeing from the cops and kind of pissing off Colonel Jupiter a little bit. So obviously with Venom back now, I think this would be a good time to focus on Peter being paranoid about Gwen's safety. And so when we switch back to Peter's life in school, his immediate first thought is I gotta go talk to Gwen, make sure she's all right. But Liz kind of cuts him off and is like, yo, Peter, have you been smoking? The whole smoking line. And then of course with Flash, checking in with Flash. So she wants to go check in with Flash with Peter. and they check in with him. And I feel like this would be a good time to have Flash be a little bit more tender with Peter Parker, but not 100%, kind of showcasing that later on in the season, he and Peter are going to be a lot closer together as friends than before. And this is where the whole idea of the friend group going out to the Christmas rink, you know, the rink by the Christmas tree, this is where their idea would spawn, and they would essentially converse with each other about going to the rink. And Peter, of course, would agree to that to keep Liz company. Meanwhile, while this is happening, Venom attacks Colonel Jupiter in his house, causing the heartbeat to go off and causing his neurons to fire up and making him go a little bit more crazy. And then when we go back to the friend group, they're all in the rink, and essentially the same scenes from the Christmas episode where they're all in the rink would happen, like Kenny, Spider-Man, you know, Peter jumping backflipping, talking with Liz, checking up on Flash, Gwen, you know, setting her boundaries, you know, the hot cocoa with Mary Jane. All that would be exactly the same, but as Peter goes to get some hot cocoa, he finds Eddie Brock, and Eddie Brock is essentially kind of threatening him as he's kind of stalking Gwen, and that causes Peter to get into Spider-Man gear, Spider-Man action, go after Venom, as Venom kind of lures him away at the same time that Jameson is going to talk to Captain George Stacy about his son John, and about how Spider-Man is probably once again being framed. And so J. Jonah calls up his son, but John at this point, you know, he's full Colonel Jupiter mode, and he's going after Spider-Man. So while Spider-Man's trying to chase after Venom, he intercepts with Spider-Man and Colonel Jupiter versus Spider-Man in the observatory, and that whole ordeal would happen exactly the same way, with Peter Parker defeating Colonel Jupiter with the electricity, which of course almost kills him, which I always found funny. Like that boy pretty much killed him for like 2 seconds. Now after the fight, Captain George Stacy would come by, you know, the police would come by to take Colonel Jupiter in. As they do, Spider-Man kind of gives a little tip to Captain George Stacy, yo, keep an eye on your daughter a little bit more, because Venom is running around and he might harm Gwen. So, you know, make sure that you keep an eye on her, and that so that Venom doesn't do anything crazy. And I think this is a good, like, first clue, or at least first indicator for George Stacy to kind of put the piece together that Spider-Man might be Peter Parker before the Identity Crisis episode, which would be next. And that would also be, you know, kind of Peter Parker making sure that even when he's not around, that, you know, Captain George Stacy, he's going to be protecting his daughter from Venom. And then, of course, you would have the asylum where John Jameson is being held now. He's being held in a mental asylum. J. Jonah is looking down, like, in disappointment. He's like, oh, my boy, my dear boy. Oh man. And then Dr. Connors is of course disappointed as Miles Warren is kind of looking on and examining. And then they come across Electro's door, because Electro would still be in the Institute, so that scene could still be exactly the same, and Miles Warren would be like, another one of yours. And of course this plants more seeds into Miles Warren, thinking that maybe the Connors are not exactly good with keeping the lab together, you know, planning that into one arc rather than kind of skewing it into a random arc that it doesn't really make sense in. Slight change in locations, hope you don't mind too much. Had a little incident. But back to it. So after the ordeal with Miles Warren going through and kind of seeing things, kind of taking notes, Peter Parker would end the episode off having Christmas with Aunt May instead. Of course, he would have to explain at the Christmas rink over the phone to his friends, essentially like, what happened? Oh, saw Eddie again, went after him again, couldn't find him again. Essentially, that's what he had to explain it to be. As he spends Christmas, he gives Aunt May the Uncle Ben picture gift, and we end off a nice little holiday episode. It's not the Sinister Six, but to me, it works better because of the story being told here in regards to Colonel Jupiter and Venom, you know, being a slower build-up, and then of course with Miles Warren, which one of the things about Miles Warren that I didn't really like about the original season 2 was that they had something going for him in the first arc with episodes 1 and 2, and then they just took a break from him, like for a solid few episodes, and then just didn't continue from there. which I never truly understood. But in this case, for me, it makes more sense because now it's kind of a more of an immediate thing with Miles Warren being present and on scene, kind of seeing that the Connors are not exactly the best when it comes to maintaining things, especially considering that they had many incidents before regarding Electro, Lizard, Symbiote. So this is just another thing with Colonel Jupiter kind of adding to the tally. We then go into episode 3, which of course I'd call Identity Crisis. And of course, I gotta start off the episode with Peter Parker at the Bugle. Everybody's kind of like on edge with J. Jonah because he's clearly still distressed about my son, my poor son. He's in the mental asylum. If I got Spider-Man, I'm gonna kill him. And then Venom comes in and it's like, do you want the wall crawler? Oh yeah, I got you. Peter Parker is Spider-Man. Intro credits. Yeah, yes, that's how I would start the episode instead of kind of a cliffhanger ending. I want that to be a good opener, a good start. Like, oh shit, Peter Parker got his identity revealed. Now, of course, it would start off a little bit of similarly with Peter Parker getting interrogated by Ned Lee, and then of course J. Jonah being like, yo, go interrogate everyone Parker's ever met to make sure that he ain't Spider-Man. As Robbie kind of like, you think he's really Spider-Man? He's just a kid. But J. Jonah's like, nah, I'm gonna run with it if I find out he really is Spider-Man. And to me, I feel like this is a detail that a lot of people miss out on with J. Jonah. He just had his son kind of get defeated by Spider-Man, get hurt by Spider-Man, get mentally and psychologically fucked up by Spider-Man. So for him, whereas before in season 1 he didn't care about revealing who Spider-Man is because that would have ruined the money process. Like, if you reveal it, who's gonna pay for a regular guy? But now he's like, oh, I want to know who Spider-Man is because I want to fuck him up. And this of course is, building up into most likely certain stuff he would have did in season 3, like maybe build a Spider Slayer, maybe get the Scorpion and start doing stuff with that. Certain things that would have been building up with season 3 because he would have wanted them. And of course you also have fucking Man-Wolf too. Ooh. Season 3 would have went crazy. So now, since this is the New Year's episode, I would have the coffee, the silver spoon stuff with MJ kind of figuring out, so Gwen, Peter, you doing anything for New Year's? Going to see the ball drop? And then the same thing at the cafe with Liz, having to get Flash his chocolate muffin. And Liz kind of checking up on Peter a little bit to see, like, what's been going on, Peter? What's been going on? Because now I wanted to make it seem more like Liz actually is caring for Peter during this time, which makes him more confused because he's doing so much to keep Gwen safe from Eddie Brock, from Venom, that Liz is being the supportive one for him in this time, is making him think that he loves Liz over Gwen, which is something that I feel like should have been showcased or explored more in the original season 2, because for me it always felt weird that he just goes with Liz despite Gwen clearly being the one for him and then going through the whole master planner just for him to kiss Liz. To me that was weird. To me, that didn't make any sense. But then again, he's a teenager love, all that, excuse to showbiz. But I wanted to make a little bit more sense, to be more coherent for it to work. So this being kind of more fuel to why Peter goes with Liz by the end of this episode instead makes more sense. And then, of course, it would build into the next arc, but we'll get there. Ned Lee, he does his interrogations with Norman Osborn. He does his interrogations with Dr. Connors, Martha Connors as well. And Peter and Gwen are back at the lab. And clearly, Peter and Gwen still have their little fling as they're at the lab. And this is when Eddie Brock is like, ladies and gentlemen, the prodigal son has returned. And the whole ordeal with him and Eddie, happening, and then Peter trying to protect Gwen, making sure that Eddie's gets near her. And Eddie's like, oh, but you will worry about me. And so Peter goes out. Everyone wants to know if he's Spider-Man. You got the news crew. But this is where things go a little bit differently than how it did in the original. Instead of having Peter and Gwen kind of go behind the heart and have their little moment, almost kissing, I would instead have Peter kind of making sure that Gwen kind of splits off from the news crew, because the news crew are clearly after him instead of Gwen. And so kind of splitting, Gwen, you go over there, I'll let the news crew follow me. And then splitting away, and then of course disappearing because he's Spider-Man. And then later on he would come back to get Eddie Brock and bro, I know why you're doing this to me, but don't you know how many other people you're gonna hurt? They have their big fight. Spider-Man's got to retreat again. Next morning at school, he shows up, and Peter, he's trying to stay away from the news crew, leave the boy alone. He's trying to go to school. Everyone thinks, do you really think he's Spider-Man? Eddie steals a vial of gene cleanser, and Flash gets his interview about, is he really Spider-Man? Flash is like, no, he ain't, and I can prove it. He dresses up as Spider-Man, he goes, we have the whole thug thing, the thug's trying to attack Flash. As Peter is kind of conflicted about, should I really stay with, as Spider-Man, is it really worth it to lie to my friends? He comes in, saves Flash, and we have the big Spider-Man versus Venom fight in the school with the whole ordeal happening, and then of course Eddie Brock losing the symbiote vanishing, disappearing into the sewers. Eddie Brock is carted off to the mental asylum. Flash, of course, throwing a one-liner. Brock's lost it. That was like twice his size, man. But as Flash is like, did you know Spider-Man thanked me personally? And the guy's like, yeah, you mean Pete? Liz is kind of worried about Pete, about, how Pete is doing, and so she wants to go check up on him rather than hear Flash kind of gloat about how he helped Spider-Man. And this is kind of where she makes herself more clear to Flash that, like, her and Flash are done. It's just not going to work out. She's more focused on Peter and wanting to be with Peter. Because of the gene cleanser being stolen by Eddie Brock, Miles Warren finally, puts the hammer down and decides that the lab should go into his favor over the Connors because they do not know how to maintain it. And so Miles Warren is going to take control of that. And to me, I feel like it's better to do this earlier on, because when we have like the whole board thing, as the board is gonna like decipher, I feel like that's something that would take longer to do, like a few months to do, rather than be immediate. So that's something that I feel like once we establish that the Connors and Miles Warren are gonna have a board fight, we could kind of move away from them and move towards something new, which is more of the gang stuff and the war and all the master planner and all that such. So we're gonna move into that territory. Peter Parker is cleared from being Spider-Man, and my phone ran out of storage, so here we are on a second day, a completely different day to finish what I was talking about. I believe I left off talking about the end of episode 3, which was that Peter reads the newspaper of the Bugle, Spider-Man's still at large, while he's at Maze for New Year's, and he's like, he can't win them all, and then he's getting a call from Gwen, talking about stuff, and then Liz shows up at the door, and the two of them embrace each other for the big old New Year's, as Peter Parker finally kind of embraces his identity for Spider-Man going into the new year. And that's how I would end arc 1. Moving on to arc 2, we got, I believe, what I said, the engineering, which is going to be episodes 4, 5, and 6. Episodes 4, I would call Blueprints, and I would start off the episode with Mysterio coming in, the whole Stan Lee cameo, and doing the whole thing that he's going to do with the arcane arts. Then I would have the start of the episode go as it would with Peter, Peter and Liz being together, MJ like, what's going on with there? He's like, oh, didn't you hear? They're together now, Gwen says that. And then Sally's trying to be like, oh, no, they ain't. And Liz is like, let me be happy. And then Harry returns, Mark returns, all the big returns. Everyone's back. Peter has his little trauma of the Green Goblin, the Goblin meat, and all that showbiz. Liz asks Peter if he can study with her later on in the day for the midterms coming up, to which Peter, of course, says, yeah, sure, we're dating now, all that showbiz. Meanwhile, Mysterio goes to the Brooklyn Bridge, is causing a little bit of havoc. He's looking for a specific truck because that truck has certain equipment, so he's looking for that truck. He's causing chaos with the dragon, and he's going for the truck, and this, of course, is like breaking news, but Peter is in the middle of an auditorium announcement with the Tater Toddlers, the criminology with George Stacy to keep a closer eye on Gwen because of Spider-Man's warning, and then also the theater guy for the drama class. And so obviously after that, Harry, is talking to Gwen about like, oh, you're the only one that had my back the whole time during the whole ordeal. And as this is happening, Jameson obviously kind of gets the little report of, there's a masked man going on the Brooklyn Bridge, so Spider-Man's got to kind of be there, And so Peter's in the middle of this auditorium, and he says, Liz, we got to study later. I gotta go. And by the way, he's a little bit irritated over the fact that Harry's getting a little bit close to Gwen. Not fully, like later on, but yeah, he's a little bit irritated despite the fact that he's with Liz. But yeah, he has to tell Liz, I gotta go deal with this thing. And then he leaves the school, after school, he becomes Spider-Man, and he goes to the Brooklyn Bridge to face Mysterio. I feel like giving a reason as to why Spider-Man is at the bridge to face Mysterio is crucial, because I believe in the actual original episode, they never gave a reason why Spider-Man showed up. He was just already there when Mysterio was there. They also didn't give a reason why Mysterio was on the bridge, so I feel like him going for certain equipment on the cargo, gives a better reason as to why Mysterio is there. So now, Spider-Man deals with him, and they have the whole ordeal with the Dormi! Spider-Man, he almost dies, but, the spider sense keeps him alive. And so once Mysterio gets the equipment that he needs from the truck, he disposes of the truck, and Spider-Man goes to save the guy. And of course, he's going to be freezing the next day of school. The next day of school, they are studying for the midterms, and Liz does the whole thing to tell Spider-Man essentially how to beat Mysterio, the smoke and mirrors thing. You're supposed to pay attention to one thing, but really it's supposed to be the other thing. And then, shows Gwen, and Harry would approach Gwen and ask to be in a relationship with her, and she'd be like, and then she would be like, yes, because she sees Peter and Liz over there, and she's like, and that's how they get together. And meanwhile, at the same time, Flash is also looking in. He's like, man, who needs Liz, And that's when he sees Shashan Jen. You name that cutie, yeah? That's Shashan Jen. She's in your bio class, man. That horror deal begins. But instead of Flash inviting her for his birthday party, which I'm not going to do right away, we're going to hold off on that a little bit. It's going to be Flash essentially inviting her to, show up to the football practice. Show up for the football practice, watch my game, essentially. And that's how that ordeal begins. That's how I would start it, Start it simple, not the birthday. There's a reason why I'm not doing the birthday yet. I'm saving the birthday for another episode, which is not going to fall in this arc, unfortunately. So then, after that, I would actually have something unique that originally was supposed to be in the plans for season 2 but never actually happened. And so what I would have is I would have Norman and Peter actually have a mentor-mentee session together. This would be my next scene where they're having a mentor-mentee session together, and Norman's showing him the ropes around the place and around his business and what he views in Peter and what he aspires for Peter going forward, what he's going to accomplish in the science field. And at the same time that this mentor-mentee session is happening, that's when Oscorp is getting raided by Mysterio. And so Peter takes the opportunity to kind of slip by under Osborn's witness to then go into Spider-Man and face Mysterio in the actual Oscorp, and then follow Mysterio all the way to his lair where they have the big battle with the illusions and stuff, and then reveals to be Quentin Beck. And I believe I would wrap up the episode the same. Actually, I lied. There's actually a few things I would add to the end of the episode. The first thing that I would have is we go to the next day where they're doing their midterms. Peter finishes his midterm. They do the whole football in the hallway scene where Gwen dodges it like that. That's when Liz comes by and it's like, thank you, you made me pass. Yeah, I could just feel it, Harry also finishes, and he says that he's gonna take Gwen, home. And Flash is upset and irritated as he finishes, and he goes with his boys, Randy and Ken. And essentially, he's disappointed that Shashan Jen didn't show up for their practice the other day, stating, don't you know who I am? Only the best quarterback. And then, of course, you end the episode off with Mysterio revealed to have been a bot, and he was actually hiding with Tinkerer the whole time, and then the whole master planner reveal. All according to my master plan. And that's how we would end off the episode and go into episode 5, which I would call Destructive Testing. This is the episode I'd call Destructive Testing. So to start off the episode, I would have Spider-Man immediately looking for Blackie Gaxton. He goes to the bar, and that's where he meets Blackie Gaxton. Every crook I meet is telling me Blackie Gaxton is the guy to talk to. And because he is focusing on trying to find where the real Mysterio went, because he got duped. And then he's also trying to find who this so-called master planner is. When he talks with Patch, of course, Patch gives it up. He's like, oh, that's the master planner. And then, of course, Tinkerer's like, they on to you, boy. And Master Planner's like, all right, round up the usual suspects. I always found it weird that in the original, it went from Mysterio to Kraven, and then it went to Spider-Man looking for Mysterio. It felt like we skipped a whole episode. We had Kraven, like a filler, and then we went on to the next. it didn't fit well. It didn't suit right for the timeline of things for me personally. So having Spider-Man immediately looking for Mysterio after the episode with Mysterio works a lot better for the story of the Master Planner here. So once we roll the whole intro credits, we also have the drama stuff, the practicing, where you have the likes of Gloria with "By the pricking of my thumb, something wicked this way comes." So once Gloria says that line, I would then cut to a prison scene, which, just because I forgot to say this, but in the Identity Crisis episode, in episode 3, to go back really quickly, in episode 3, I forgot to mention, you know when Quinn Beck gets interviewed by Ned Lee? Instead of Quinn Beck, obviously, because this happens before the Mysterio episode, I would have had it be Montana. And I know what you're gonna say. Well, there was a deleted scene in season 1 where Montana broke out of prison. Well, you see, where one place it could be deleted and another place it could be reutilized. And this is where it would be reutilized. You see, since I would have in episode 3 Montana be the one's like, well, if I knew who Spider-Man was, I'd take him out. All the boys would know what to do with that information. Here, in episode 5, I would have the Mysterio bot be in jail, breaking everybody out. So it breaks out Rhino, breaks out Sandman, breaks out Adrian Toomes, Vulture, and then breaks out Montana. But Montana, instead of going with the Sinister Six, splits away from the Sinister Six and instead goes with the Enforcers, because he's like, that shit didn't work the first time around. Why the hell would I want to tag with you boys again? So Montana is not joining the Sinister Six, and we have that scene here, but it's just executed differently because that's how I would reutilize it. So that way, continuity-wise, it's not just a deleted scene. It's actually canon that Montana breaks out of prison, and you see it, and that is why he is out of prison. I then would cut to Kenny doing his audition. Reputation, I have ruined my reputation. And of course, I would cut to a scene of Peter going about his school day, and something that I forgot to mention in episode 4 as well. Man, I'm forgetting a lot of things. Continuing on the trend is the suspicion that some people still have over Peter being Spider-Man. Now, this is something that I always wanted to see. I wanted to see some people still being like, is he still Spider-Man? Could he still be Spider-Man though? And that's what I'm gonna do here with like Peter going through the school, and it's playing on the whole Kenny line of reputation, where like people are looking at him like, he did ditch Liz the other day, a few days ago, for something. And even Harry, Harry's starting to hear the rumors, and he approaches Pete when he's at his locker, and Pete's like, it's not what you think. And then his mask is leaning over, and he's like, oh, gotta close the locker. I have no idea what people are talking about regarding people thinking I'm Spider-Man. And instead of what happens in the other original, I would have Peter talking with Harry about, so, you and Gwen, huh? Kind of like started that conversation going, it's like, yeah, me and Gwen. And then as that happens, Flash comes by, attacks Peter's like, yo, Parker, Shashan Jen, what do I do? She's like totally immune to the Flash. And he's like, have you ever taken interest in things that she likes? And then Flash looks at the drama. She's like, drama, eh? I might have to practice that drama. I might have to do that. I then would cut to the mental asylum, where now we actually have more mugs in the asylum. We have Eddie Brock, we have John Jameson, we have Cletus Cassidy, Doc Ock, we have Electro. So we have a more lineup. And so what I like about this is that you get to kind of see a little bit of an update on what's going on with Eddie, what's going on with John Jameson, as compared to the original season 2, because the original season 2, they were put in an asylum and that was it for them. Where here, you kind of get a little bit of an update. John Jameson, he still wants the power. Oh man, I miss the power. And Eddie is like, the symbiote will come back. It'll come back. So as, you're seeing all the villains together lined up, and Electro's like, Electro. And he goes to Doc Ock, and Doc Ock's like, I don't want to hear anybody talking about me being Doc Ock. I don't want nothing to do with that name. That's when I would have Sandman and Rhino break in. So Sandman would break down, bust in, and release Electro. John Jameson, still having that little bit of a hero in him, tries to save him, but Electro, stops that. And so as they're releasing Electro and Doc Ock is not a part of it, Tinker is updated that, hey, both Montana and Doc Ock are out. And so Tinker is like, yo, Master Planner, we're down a few mugs. What are we gonna do about that? And so Master Planner's like, oh, I got somebody in in mind. And that's when I'd cut back to Craven, who has been essentially training this whole time, trying to regain his honor, trying to regain the strength to finally be able to take down Spider-Man. And he's been solo by himself the whole time. And that's when Calypso would come in and be like, somebody's been trying to contact us. And Craven would get the message from Master Planner. Yo, Craven, how would you feel hunting in packs? And then we cut back to the plays, and Mary Jane is doing her play. Mary Jane gets the theater teacher really riled up. He's like, yes. And then when it's about to be Hobie Brown, Flash tries to interrupt, and he's like, well, don't you know who I am? We then cut back to all the villains there at the lair, and then Craven shows up, and he kind of walks in the room, and he's looking at everybody. And, he's kind of scoping out the landscape, being more of the loner of this group, and he's kind of seeing everybody, and he's being introduced, and he's learning of everybody, and he's like, I don't know how I feel about all you people. And that's when the Master Planner says, oh man, I'm disappointed that 2 of my boys couldn't show up. I was really hoping for the Sinister 7, but now we got the Sinister 6 thanks to the addition of Craven. And don't worry, I got a master plan for Spider-Man. So then Harry does his audition whilst Gwen is waiting outside for him about turning in my former self. And Liz is next in line, waiting with Peter, and she's essentially asking Peter, Peter, can you wait here for me after I finish my big audition? I don't know how it's gonna go. I don't know how it's gonna be. And Harry returns to Gwen, and the 4 of them are kind of forced to plan this double date that Peter and Gwen are not exactly excited for. As they plan that stuff, and as Liz goes to do his part, Peter finds out news regarding the Sinister 6 attacking, and so unfortunately he has to leave Liz and go deal with the Sinister 6. So as Peter shows up to deal with the Sinister 6, he first battles against the likes of Electro and Vulture, and he fights them 2 first. I forgot to mention, since this is not the Christmas episode, Vulture specifically would be defeated in a different way regarding Electro's powers. Essentially it'd be the same thing though, like Electro would electrocute Vulture and cause him to crash essentially, but without the whole tree thing. So that would still be the same. Electro's defeat would be the same. And then as Sandman and Rhino knock him out, we go to commercial and we go straight to Shashan Jen's audition, where she's like, that blasted spider, fool, venomous toad, something like that. And that's when Spider-Man would face against Sandman and the Rhino. Sandman and Rhino's defeat would be the same. Rhino going through the ice water, Sandman getting frozen by the snow. And then Spider-Man would be tricked by the illusions of Doc Ock and Shocker, but in reality it's Craven and Mysterio who chase him to the mall. And obviously it's not Christmas themed like it would have been, but it's still the mall. And so, Craven would be defeated from the bot. I'm not sure how he would have tanked the explosion, but let's just say that he was drugged up like he usually is. Craven was drugged up. That's how he survives the explosion, because it's a cartoon. You can't trust cartoons. And then of course Spider-Man finds Mysterio. He's like, what are you doing with all that tech you stole, huh? Oh, don't you think the Master Planner's got a master plan? And then of course he would web him up for the police to take him in. So then it would be Flash's turn to do the play, and then Flash of course would be like, is this supposed to be English? And we cut back to the police, ready to take all the villains in, but the villains have all been extracted. So the villains being of course Sandman, Rhino, Vulture, and Electro specifically. Craven just once again disappears into the night, having failed his lost honor at being essentially attacked by his own teammates. I would have Doc Ock's arms come to kidnap him, and then I would have the students in the criminology class that they do, and this is before they find out about all the roles in the play. I would save the roles for the play for the next episode. So this episode we don't get to know who makes it into the play just yet, but it would end it off with the criminology class, Mark drawing a picture of Mary Jane after seeing her audition earlier on, and Mary Jane of course finding the image and liking it for some reason, whilst Peter is trying to explain to Liz essentially why he wasn't there, why he couldn't be there. He had something come up regarding work, of course. As Peter's doing that, Captain Stacy's kind of listening in, and then he somewhat alludes to Peter being Spider-Man, or at least that he knows that Peter's Spider-Man, by saying like, wisecracks don't save lives, as I'm sure you would know, Peter, and just kind of leave it at that, leave it with that mark first. Peter being like, huh, that's weird, and just leave you ambiguous with that. And that's how I'd end off episode 5, which I would call destructive testing instead of the other name, because I'm saving the other name for later. So then we move on to episode 6, and this is the one I would call sheer strength. This would be the Master Planner episode. Welcome to your lair. master planner. It's revealed to be Doc Ock, of course, and we do the whole ordeal. But the difference this time is that not only is Vulture, Electro, and Tinkerer there, but also Sandman and Rhino are there as well, which is different from the original. In the original, Sandman and Rhino, they just kind of vanish into the ether. I don't know what happens to them. But in this episode, I would actually use Sandman and Rhino for a reason and for a purpose that I will explain later. And it would make perfect sense as to everything that would happen later on. So first thing in regards to the students at school is the casting list is posted. All the students find out, it's like, yo, Harry, you got a lead. And he calls his dad, you know, I kind of got a girlfriend now and I'm in the lead in a play. Yeah. Did you say you're proud of me? Flash is like, what do you mean I'm not on the list? And he goes to the professor. He's like, yo, teach! You could put a good word in for a cute girl. And he's like, oh, yes, I understand, but I'm trying to run a play, not a dating service. And leave it at that. And meanwhile, you know, while all the students are there trying to figure out that showbiz, and Liz is kind of also there trying to figure out, Peter's not there. And Peter is actually with Norman Osborn, who is being mentored. And they are at the destruction site. He meets Morse Bench, aka Hydro Man, but accidentally what ends up happening is that a self-destruct sequence sets off, and that's because of the master planner with the Bluetooth transmitter chip, and he sets off the explosives, and Spider-Man comes in, saves the day. Well, we tried, Adrian, so we kind of moved through all that. So then moving from that, Ock would explain essentially, you know, I have other qualms to focus on. Electro and Tinkerer are kind of fixing some things, you know, we're working on this, you know, to make it a little bit better for you. Whilst they're working on stuff in the place, I would have Sandman be the one to be sent out alongside Adrian. You know, Ock would essentially tell, yo, Adrian, go do this for me. Peter would be on his double date with Liz, Harry, and Gwen at the Silver Spoon, and they're trying to have conversation, but it's not going so hot, not going so well, as Flash kind of confronts Peter at the Silver Spoon like, yo, Parker, your plan didn't work. I didn't get the girl, bro. I can't get in the play, bro. And then Peter kind of suggests, you dressed up as Spider-Man that one time. You know, that's kind of like playing into a theater role. Maybe you should try that. And to me, I feel like this is a better way to do Flash getting the role because it's Peter paying Flash back, which we never really get except for the diner scene, which that was just one instance. This would be the second instance because he owes him 2. Remember, he said he owes him 2. So this would be the one instance, you know, helping him with getting into the role of the play by like saying, yo, you know, you should go show him the news of when you were dressed as Spider-Man and, you know, convince him from there. And whilst this is happening, of course, the Silver Spoon is going a little bit chaotic because the master planner is doing all his stuff. The police are gone, Crash and all that showbiz. And then Sandman is the one that would come and get Gwen, give it to Vulture. Vulture comes swoop in. You would have Sandman go with Tinkerer into his van, and Spider-Man would follow the van. So Master Planner kind of informs them, yo, Tinkerer, Sandman, Spider-Man's on your tail. So Sandman would go out, and Spider-Man and Sandman will have a one-on-one. Spider-Man, obviously, would be a lot more serious. You know, he's taking this seriously. He's beating up Sandman, but Sandman is still putting up a good fight. And this is where Peter, for the first time, kind of begins to lean in for Sandman. It's like, you know, Marco, I thought you wanted the big score. A girl like Gwen is in danger. You know, she might get hurt. And so Sandman is now kind of like thinking about it. He's like, man, Gwen might actually truly get hurt. You know, this poor girl is going to get hurt because of this whole plan. And he's really starting to contemplate it now. He's like, man, I didn't want to actually hurt anybody. I just wanted the big score. And so what ends up happening is that Sandman actually, in some way, kind of indicates to Spider-Man where Tinkerer is going. And then kind of disappears and leads off. Make it seem like, oh no, Spider-Man took me down type of deal. But in reality, he's just playing for the camera. So Master Planner does not know, you know, so Master Planner just thinks that, oh, he defeated Sandman, and so Sandman's just kind of out of commission, but in reality, Sandman disappears into the night. And this would be the first sign of Sandman being more of a good guy, as compared to all of it being in just one episode. You know, this is just one sign, like, oh, Sandman never wanted to actually hurt anybody like this, so this would be like a good indicator. So then Vulture would drop off Gwen, they'd call Captain Stacy, be like, all right, we need you to do some business. And at the same time, Flash would would go to his theater professor with the news outlet of when he dressed as Spider-Man and tricked the news outlet into thinking that he was Spider-Man. And the theater professor is impressed. You know, he's like, Flash, I didn't know you had it in you. I didn't know you had such talent. And this is where he decides to give him the Nick Bottom role. And although Flash is excited, he doesn't actually know what role he signed up for. So whilst that's going on, Peter is following the Tinkerer. You know, he caught up to the Tinkerer. So this is what I would have, right? Tinker would show up at the front door of the lair. So this is something that I always found weird because I never really understood why they did this. But in the original, Spider-Man would show up at the lair and he said specifically, well, I'm not getting through the front door, so I might as well get through the back door. And to me, I never understood why. It's like, if they knew he was coming anyway, why did he have to go through the back door if there was nothing at the front door? So this is where I would have something be at the front door, and that something, of course, is Rhino. Rhino is guarding the front door. Tinkerer shows up, he's at the lair, and he's like, all right, you know, I'm here, and he has all the codes to actually get into the lair. Rhino doesn't. Rhino is just there guarding the entrance. So this is where Spider-Man would come in, web Tinkerer up in the sky rafters, and of course, you know, Spider-Man would deal with Rhino, but he would find out, you know, like, I can't be fighting Rhino right now, so I'm gonna take the back entrance. And the back entrance, of course, is underwater, and Rhino remembers from his literal previous fight, shit, I can't go in the water without a scuba tank. That'd be terrible for me. So he can't follow Spider-Man into the back of the lair. So he thinks, let me just go through the front of the lair, but the only person that has the codes is Tinkerer, and he's webbed up. So Rhino thinks, I'm gonna do full force. And then Tinkerer is like, no, don't do that, because if you do that, you're gonna cause a collapse in the underwater layer that's gonna implode it. So you can't do that. So Rhino's trapped up and he's like, ugh! So he's just gonna have to stay topside and try to get Tinkerer down this whole time. But obviously he's Rhino, he can't really jump, and Tinker is webbed all the way up here. But the reason why I have this is because both Rhino and Tinkerer are supposed to get away because they show up in later episodes just fine, which in the original season 2 is not how it goes. Rhino just disappeared with Sandman after the Sinister Six episode and was never talked about again, which I always found was weird. And then for Tinkerer, Spider-Man caught Tinkerer. Spider-Man most likely brought him into jail. So how he got out? Beats me, but now there's a reason as to how both Rhino and Tinkerer would escape and then, you know, have a reason to be undercover whilst the Master Planner stuff obviously goes to hell. So now, obviously, Spider-Man goes to the back door, and I believe the rest of this would play out exactly the same as it would with the Electro being in there, the whole Electro shit. You know, he gets taken out, which I also found was weird that Electro somehow magically got away in episode 4. So keeping him at the base instead and then replacing him with Sandman would be a lot better, because now Sandman has a reason to disappear. Sandman kind of indicated to Spider-Man where the lair is, and that's how he finds out. And so Elektra can stay there as like the last blockade, if you will. And of course, whilst this is happening, Captain Stacy is trying to get into the headquarters, Vulture is attacking the headquarters, and all that showbiz. So Spider-Man fights the Master Planner, has the big old building collapse on him, and this is where the name Sheer Strength, episode 6, Sheer Strength, comes into play. He brings up the building, saves Gwen, gets Electro, and they get out of there, and they get through the escape pod, and Gwen obviously calls up Cap. Stacy's like, I'm fine, Dad. And then, of course, as they go back up to the surface, Doc Ock, Rhino, and Tinkerer all gone. The three of them are gone, and they disappeared, and now they have a reason to be gone, and it all makes sense now. You know, it makes sense now why Tinkerer and Rhino are gone, and it makes sense why they show back up later rather than what happened in the original, and also makes sense why Sandman is kind of now on his own as compared to the original, where he just some reason went back to the big man instead of staying with Doc Ock. So now everything makes sense. You see, this is why I'm rebooking, so that everything can flow much more naturally and make more sense. Even though the Flash thing is a little bit of a stretch of he has to go show him the news broadcast of himself when he was Spider-Man, to me it still works. It still works for the narrative of the story because, you know, Peter suggested it to him, and so he helped him out. That's one of his two helps. And then of course we're going to get into the second one when we get to episode 10, but we'll get there. So now we go to the criminology class, where in criminology class, Flash goes to Shashan Jen with the role. He's like, Shashan, check me out, I'm in the role. And Shashan's like, I don't think you need any rehearsal. You just signed up to be Nick Bottom in A Midsummer Night's Dream. You got that role name. Oh, you know I do, baby. So that whole ordeal happens, and then George Stacy is obviously stating, I once thought a man behind a mask had something to hide, but I learned that a man behind the mask actually might have something to protect. Says that's the class. He does somewhat imply it to Parker, but it's more nuanced than it was originally, where it was just like Parker in a room by himself, in the class by himself, which I always found was weird. But now it makes sense. I wanted Captain Stacy to start off like, even though he knew Peter Parker was Spider-Man, he didn't like the fact that Peter was Spider-Man. So that's why in the previous episode he indicated to Spider-Man, wise cracks don't save lives. I'm sure as in like, keep people away from danger. Stop doing what you're doing. But now, after Spider-Man essentially saved Gwen, he has more respect for Spider-Man. Now he's like, okay, Peter, I respect you. Thank you for saving Gwen. So Peter, of course, after the class, he checks in with Gwen. He's like, Gwen, are you all right? All that showbiz. And this is where I would have Peter almost kiss Gwen. They would almost kiss. Because now, this is where I would have Peter's love for Gwen really shine through. Because in the original story, it went from the Master Planner arc, and then immediately Peter got with Liz. That didn't make sense. Like, he went through the whole sheer strength just to get with Liz. That didn't make sense to me. To where this reversal of the arcs makes much more sense, because now it started off with the whole identity crisis thing with Venom, and so he felt like he needed to stay away from Gwen to keep her safe, and that's why he ended up with Liz. But now, after he essentially got saved with the power of Gwen, so now he knows that he loves her. Now this is where Peter really finds out, like, man, I'm in love with Gwen, not Liz. But of course, you gotta end the episode off with a little cliffhanger, like they can't kiss, and Liz and Harry, they come by and they drag them in separate directions, kind of ending off the show on a little bit of a downer note, because like Peter and Gwen, oh no, two lovers being pulled apart. And that's how it end episode 6, and that's how it end arc 2 engineering. 3 episodes instead of the 4 episodes. To me, it fits a lot better, it's a lot more smooth, and it works a lot more structured wise. So then of course it would go into arc 3, which I would have be the one with 4 episodes. And the first episode for arc 3, which is episode 7, I would call this one Probable Cause. So I would have the whole camcord gimmick be a thing where Peter Parker starts off with the camcord gimmick, we were friends since we were kids, but I guess some people change, and instead of implying that to Eddie, I'm implying it to Harry, because they were also friends when they were younger, at least. So now that's the implications of like Peter and Harry are gonna have some complications this episode. Meanwhile, I would have the opening of this confrontation where you have the villains with the Big Man, Hammerhead, and then the Sinister Six. Essentially, you have Doc Ock, Vulture, Rhino, Sandman, Tinkerer, Shocker, Enforcers, all of them. So all of them are there, and they're all disagreeing with each other about what's the whole ordeal regarding the business. And this is where you find out that Doc Ock and the Big Man, they have completely different visions of what they want for the criminal empire. And so this is where they begin to split away from each other. Like Doc Ock no longer wants to work for the Big Man, he's going to work for himself instead of helping the Big Man out and doing their own things. And this is where the divisive of the teams comes in. So now the Enforcers are on Team Big Man with Hammerhead. Rhino joins Team Doc Ock with the Vulture. Tinkerer actually switches sides because Master Planner's plan went wrong, and that's why Tinkerer is now working for the Big Man. And Sandman is also working for the Big Man. And so this is where their split happens and they go their separate ways. And so now Hammerhead's like, Sandman, I got something just for you. Intro credits. And then this is where we would open with Sandman robbing the jewelry store. He's trying to get some cash. He's trying to get some money, eh? And then Spider-Man would come in and be like, Sandy, I'm disappointed. We went through that whole conversation last time about like protecting people, and you're still doing bad things. Like, what is going on? He's like, I want the big score, Spider-Man, and now I'm gonna take you out in order to get no more Master Planner, no more any of that. It's time to get my money's worth. So after their whole fight and Sandman has to leave, oh, my big score. We have the school where Flash is trying to convince Shishajen to go to his birthday party. So now I would have the birthday party happen, Flash. So I know Flash's birthday is like in January 20th, I believe. This episode would take place in late January, which this is what I said about Arc 3 being between both January and February, because fitting all of that into early February, I feel like doesn't work, where this being January going into February works a lot better for story purposes. And you don't have to do like a month per arc, right? You don't have to do that. So I'm fine with the splitting, you know, 2 episodes, maybe January, 2 episodes February. That works a lot better. So the double dates would show up with there being tension now, because now Peter and Gwen are clearly into each other, but Harry and Liz are kind of noticing they're like being a little bit tense, but they were invited to Flash's birthday party as well, and so they're like, okay, we could do this, you know, we can handle this, we'll settle this, we'll meet each other at the party type of deal. We'll go together. And Flash is obviously, he doesn't know that Peter is invited, but Flash is convinced himself that Shashan Jen is going to show up. You know, oh, she's going to show up to my birthday party. She took my invitation, she's going to show up. Even though the fact that Shashan Jen obviously was like, Flash, I'm not going out with you. So then I would have Sandman essentially asking Hammerhead, oh, come on, Hammy, give me another chance. And Hammerhead's like, oh, I do got another idea in mind for you. That would, of course, be the museum, but before the museum, Spider-Man's kind of contemplating to himself, man, what your problem be? What's going on around here? So then the beginning of Foswell kind of looking into the big man further, because originally in season 1, Foswell was led to believe that the big man was not actually a villain. He told Peter, like, I checked it out, but, you know, Tombstone, he's one of the good guys. But now, after the whole ordeal with the Green Goblin, Foswell has essentially been spending his past few months, you know, looking into the big man. He's getting closer to finding out the truth, and he confronts Peter about it. It's like, Peter, you were right about the big man. Tombstone might actually be a villain, and he's got a couple of plans in mind. He's got some things going on. For example, there's this like museum where he's looking for artifacts and stuff, and this is where Peter finds out that Sandman's gonna rob the museum, and that's how he shows up at the museum. Sandman's like, how do you always know where I am when I'm doing a job? They have their fight at the museum. Sandman actually wins because of the whole great power comes great gullibility. He takes the stuff and he leaves, and Peter's like, damn. So Peter, of course, the next day goes with Liz, Harry, Gwen, Flash's birthday party. Flash is like, why is Puny Parker crashing my party? And this is where they find out that Flash and Peter have been friends since their childhood, and it turns out a lot has happened between them. He gave him Flash's name. MJ is being somewhat slutty, not sure why, but she was. But obviously, with Mark now being there for this, Mark is kind of looking into his like, oh, chica, you're quite interesting type. So then at the beach, Sandman does a whole castle for the little girl. The little girl thanks Sandman. He's like, thanks. And Hammer said, you going soft. I'm like, I'm not going soft. Yeah, I can do whatever I want. And then he gets the money. He's like, that's it. Yeah, well, Doc Ock wanted his loan out fee from the last time you helped him with a super gun. Big man took his cut, of course. So that's all that's left. But don't worry. You got that oil tank over there? That can settle for a big score. And obviously, Foswell learned about the oil tanker as well when he's doing his research about the big man. And so he contacts Peter. He's like, Peter, I heard about this oil tanker going on as well. You know, big man's next operation is going to be for this oil tanker. He wants some oil to get some money. And so Peter, when he hears about that over the phone, he obviously plans on going to the oil tanker to deal with Sandman. But before that actually happens, at the party, him and Harry begin to have some complications because, you know, Flash is not cool with Harry, but Harry doesn't know why Flash is not cool with him right now. So whilst Flash is disappointed that Shashan Jen didn't show up, Harry and Peter are having a little bit of complications regarding their dates and regarding Liz and Gwen, because Peter's clearly trying to hit on Gwen. Harry is like, what are you doing, bro? Gwen's with me now. You know, what's going on? And so they're having some tension, but it's not fully like a full-blown over, but they're having tension to where Peter's storming out. Even though it's uncharacteristic, it's an excuse, essentially, for him to leave and to go deal with the Sandman, whilst making it seem like he just kind of left the party, where Gwen and Liz and Mary Jane are all kind of wondering, like, you know, is Peter all right? And Harry kind of feels bad. He's like, damn, I already did that to Peter. I'm sorry about that, Peter. So then, of course, we have the big Spider-Man versus the big Sandman episode. The oil tanker, the whole ordeal, exactly the same. Sandman saves the people from the oil tanker when it blows up. You wanted the big score, Marco? He just scored as big as a man can get. But obviously, I would do things originally how Greg Wiseman would want it to be done. Sandman, instead of being like there, he's kind of like a little itty-bitty speck of sand, and he's slowly regrowing, and then obviously disappears into the night. You know, it's a little itty-bitty. He's gonna come back, right? But before Spider-Man leaves, obviously, he doesn't see that with Sandman, but Captain Stacy's there, you know, examining it, and is alluding to the fact that he might know that Spider-Man is Peter Parker again, as they talk about the sacrifice of Sandman, you know, indicating like it takes a lot for a man to sacrifice all that. And, you know, in that conversation, Stacy's alluding to the fact that he knows Peter's Spider-Man in regards to sacrifice. And of course that makes Peter feel bad about how he treated Harry at the party and used it as an excuse to go fight Sandman. So obviously he calls up Harry, you know, he apologizes, he talks to Liz, he says, even though I might not always be there for you, he promises that despite all that, he is going to care for her and tend to her and, hang out with her and spend time with her, even though he can't prove that, obviously. But Liz is okay with knowing that Peter is just alright and is doing better. And meanwhile, Peter and Foswell, they meet up and they're talking about the case, and Foswell finds out that Silvermane Freddy is being released from prison, and this could potentially lead to a crime war. And that's how it ends episode 7, Probable Cause. And then, of course, going on from there out, I would have every episode essentially be exactly the same. Episodes 8, 9, 10 being the rest of the criminology arc, and then you have 11, 12, 13, but obviously there'd be a few little things that add here and there. First of all, episode 8, Accomplices, I would have it be exactly the same, but when Harry and Peter are talking about the Osbury, they'd be a little bit more serious, have a little bit more of a serious conversation regarding their health and regarding their relationships before, Harry gets a little disappointed about the fact that Peter has an Osbury, he doesn't. Episode 9, I would call episode 9 Reinforcements, because it plays into the theme of the Enforcers. I would have it exactly be the same, but when Tombstone is talking with Hammerhead about, "You got the Enforcers without going through me?" And he's like, "Yeah, I did." So now there is a reason as to why Tombstone is having the Enforcers do the heist. Is because Sandman was taken out. Sandman failed. Hammerhead failed with Sandman. So now essentially he has to make the Enforcers do the heist because Sandman's no longer there to do the heist for him. So that plays into the same arc. So that's a reason as to why the Enforcers are going on a heist rather than protecting Tombstone for the gang war, which is why Hammerhead essentially has to show up to have Tombstone's back in the gang war. So now it makes much more sense in that regards too. Episode 10, Gangland, exactly the same. I would not change a thing about it. Episode 11, the subtext going into arc 4, which I believe is drama, exactly the same. Even though I personally don't like the episode, I keep it exactly the same. The only difference I would make is instead of Mary Jane just not trying, like, "You see my blah 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 blah," instead of her not trying, I would have it be like she's good, but she's not good playing off of others, because Liz is not good. Liz is not good at her doing the play, so she's not good at playing off of Liz, and the professor's upset about it. Ladies, you gotta work together on this, Episode 12, opening night, exactly the same, wouldn't change a damn thing about it. And then, of course, ended off with episode 13, the final curtain. Wouldn't change anything about it. My mistake, there is actually something that I would change, and that would be the opening scene with a few of the other scenes. So actually, I would have the opening scene be about Peter talking with Liz over the phone, and then you can have the scene with Gwen and Harry, and then, "Gwen, I need your help." Intro credits, and then once it goes into the intro credits, it can go with Peter talking with Aunt May, and then visiting Gwen to discuss with Harry about the ordeal, which I'll get into in just a moment. But then after the scene with Harry and after Peter confesses his love to Gwen, that's when I would have Spider-Man attacking the goblin googlies, the Pumpkinhead mugs, beating them up, trying to look for Green Goblin, and then ultimately deciding, you know what, man, I'm just gonna go straight to Osborn's house instead, because that's where I know for a fact the Green Goblin's going to be. So I want to switch those around because I feel like it flows a lot better than it would the other way around. So that way there doesn't have to be a random jump cut from Harry going home and telling his dad, and it could all feel like it's on the same place, same time. Spider-Man working his way over there, getting to Osborn's house. But, however, I would explain a little bit more as to where the Goblin has essentially been holding Harry hostage. Just a little bit more information about that, because I feel like that went a little bit underused. Like, oh, Harry got kidnapped, and that was it. But, like, where was he this whole time? He was kidnapped. And I understand that they were playing off of this comic from the original Spider-Man, where I believe they believed that Spider-Man kidnapped Peter, but then Peter said, "Oh, Spider-Man, let me go," and they just kind of let it go. They kind of played on that, but instead of it being Spider-Man kidnapped Peter, it was Green Goblin kidnapped Harry. So I think they were playing off of that, if I'm not mistaken, but I still would have a little bit more explanation, because it does feel kind of weird that he kidnapped Harry for no explanation. And that's how I would rebook season 2 of the Spectacular Spider-Man, and I think that's a really good rebooking. It explains more lore in regards to each of the scenes. It has more of the scenes that Greg Weisman would have wanted in the story, whilst also, putting in some deleted stuff and making the arc seem a lot more smoother better for the relationships building over time. There are a little bit of some corners that are still not cut all the way, or I should say I cut a little bit of corner, but I think it's a lot better than the original season 2. It's not to say the original season 2 is bad, but I think my season 2 works structurally a lot better and feels like it would with season 1. Season 1 felt perfect with the structure and the way the story built, and now my version of season 2 feels the same way, and it plays off of each episode. And obviously, of course, I would have certain things with season 3 play into the factor. Like, I would have Craven become the feline predator in season 3 with Miles Warren testing out the mammalian DNA, rather than in season 2, because I want the original Craven in season 2, and then you could do the Puma version of Craven in season 3 when you also do the Man Wolf with John Jameson. So that's how I would play all that into factor, and I would do a rebooking, or not a rebooking, I would do a fantasy booking of my own personal take of season 3 in the future. If you really want it, you gotta give me a hell yeah in the comments, because this is gonna take me a long time to make. I know I announced that I'm switching the date as to when this is released, so this is released a lot later than it originally was supposed to, but it's all good because personally I still had a fun time rebooking this, taking the time to make this, and I hope that you like it. If you think that this is a better season 2 than the original season 2, give me a hell yeah. Or if you think you got a few more ideas to add in, let me know. That's what the comments section for. As a matter of fact, let's face the facts. I'm here to give you a reality check. If you can't handle that, I'll beat you with a baseball bat. Best believe. Arrivederci, you bitch ass motherfuckers. Play my theme song.